That piece of military junk is an eyesore and a violation, and if it's not gone by tomorrow, I'm having it towed and scrapped," Karen shrieked, her finger jabbing the air so hard her floral muumuu trembled with the force of her indignation. "And you'll be paying the fines, the towing fees, and the disposal costs, Mr. Miller. Consider this your final warning." The certified letter she'd slapped into my hand felt like a declaration of war, its crisp edges sharp against my calloused skin. The paper was still warm from the printer, a fresh-baked edict from the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Her face, a puffy mask of self-righteous fury, was framed by a halo of bleached blonde hair that looked as brittle as her temperament. She stood on my brand-new sod, her orthopedic sandals sinking slightly into the perfectly manicured lawn I'd spent weeks cultivating, a petty tyrant claiming dominion over my small patch of hard-earned peace. Behind her, her beige sedan was parked halfway onto my driveway apron, a territorial marking I was sure was also against some arcane rule she kept locked in her binder of neighborhood sins. I looked from her quivering jowls down to the official-looking document, then back up at her smug, expectant face. After 20 years in the Marine Corps, I'd been threatened by men with machine guns, stared down insurgents in dusty villages halfway across the world, and listened to drill instructors who could curdle milk with a whisper. Karen, the president of the Oakmont Estates Homeowners Association, didn't even register on the threat scale. She was just loud and wrong. But in this new, strange world of civilian life, loud and wrong could apparently get a man's property seized. This is insane. If you're reading this, you probably know the feeling. The moment some petty bureaucrat with a little bit of power decides to make your life a living hell. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what your own HOA nightmare story is. We're all in this together. Now, let me tell you how I handled mine. I took a slow breath, the kind Gunny Davis taught me to take before breaching a door, letting the air fill my lungs and settle the adrenaline. I folded the letter neatly in half and tucked it into my back pocket. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "that is not a piece of junk. It is a decommissioned light armored vehicle, a piece of Marine Corps history that my unit alumni association is restoring for the VFW Memorial Park downtown. It is legally registered, insured, and parked on my private property in accordance with every city and state ordinance." I gestured toward the massive, tarpaulin-covered shape at the far end of my oversized driveway. It was set back from the road, partially obscured by the new oak trees I'd planted. It is also, per the HOA bylaws I read before closing on this house, considered a recreational vehicle project, and is afforded a 90-day period for restoration before it requires permanent screening. It has been here for 12 days. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of fact she couldn't breach. Her face purpled, the smugness curdling into raw anger. "I am the president of this board, Mr. Miller. I interpret the bylaws, and I interpret that tank as an abandoned commercial vehicle. It's unsightly, it lowers property values, and it's a danger to the children." A danger to the children? It was a static, 8-wheeled, 21-foot-long metal box with no engine, no transmission, and no weapon systems. The most dangerous thing about it was the possibility of a kid stubbing their toe on one of the tires. "It's not abandoned, it's covered," I countered, my voice still level. "It's not commercial, it's historical. And the only thing lowering property values around here is the constant stream of violation notices you plaster on people's doors for having the wrong shade of beige trim, a flicker of something. Maybe the sting of truth flashed in her eyes. "You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow," she snapped, turning on her heel with a huff. The tow truck is already scheduled. As she stomped back to her illegally parked car, I felt the familiar cold fire ignite in my gut. It was the same feeling I got when a plan went sideways, when incompetence and arrogance threatened the mission. She hadn't just insulted my project. She had dismissed my service, disrespected my property, and declared war on my peace. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She saw a quiet, middle-aged retiree planting petunias. She was about to meet the gunnery sergeant who never, ever lost a battle over procedure. My mission was no longer restoring the LAV. It was dismantling her tin pot dictatorship, one bylaw at a time. The battle for Oakmont Estates had just begun. After Karen's grand departure, leaving a trail of righteous indignation and the faint scent of cheap perfume in her wake, I retreated into the cool sanctuary of my home office. The certified letter felt like a live grenade in my hand, its pin pulled. I laid it flat on my desk, its stark black text a stark contrast to the warm oak. The words leaped off the page. Final notice, immediate removal, fines accruing daily. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, designed to induce panic and immediate compliance. But panic wasn't in my vocabulary. My first action wasn't to rage or despair. It was to open the thick, 3-ring binder left for me at closing. The Oakmont Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. The HOA Bible. For the next 3 hours, I did what I did best. I studied the enemy's playbook. With a yellow highlighter and a pot of black coffee, I dissected every article, every section, every tedious subclause. I read about lawn maintenance, mailbox uniformity, and the specific Benjamin Moore color palette approved for front doors. It was a suffocating document, a testament to the human desire to control every blade of grass. But buried deep within its pages, I found my ammunition. Article 7, Section 4B, Parking of Vehicles. It was a dense paragraph, but the key phrases were clear. Prohibited vehicles included commercial trucks over 1 ton, unlicensed or inoperable vehicles visible from the street, and any vehicle left abandoned for a period exceeding 14 days. My LAV, while heavy, wasn't a commercial truck. Its registration was for a historical exhibition vehicle. It wasn't inoperable in the traditional sense, it was undergoing restoration, and it certainly wasn't unlicensed. And it wasn't abandoned. Then I found the crown jewel. Article 9, Section 2. Enforcement and Violation Procedure. It laid out the process with military precision. First, a written courtesy warning with a 30-day period to cure the alleged violation. Second, if the violation persists, a formal notice of violation, sent via certified mail, offering a hearing before the Architectural Review Committee. Third, only after the hearing and a final noncompliance finding could fines be levied or remedial action, such as towing, be taken. Karen had skipped steps 1 and 2 and gone straight to a self-declared final notice, appointing herself judge, jury, and executioner. She hadn't just bent the rules, she had shattered them. Her entire threat was a house of cards built on a foundation of procedural violations. My next step was to draft a response. I didn't write an angry email. I composed a formal letter, citing the specific articles and sections she had violated. I used the same dispassionate, precise language as the bylaws themselves. Dear Ms. Albright and the Oakmont Estates HOA Board, it began. This letter is in response to the final notice I received on October 5th. Please be advised that this notice is procedurally deficient and legally void. I methodically listed her failures. Failure to provide a 30-day cure period as per Article 9, Section 2A. Failure to issue a proper notice of violation. Failure to offer a hearing before the committee. I then addressed her specific claims, quoting Article 7, Section 4B, and explaining, with attached copies of the vehicle's registration and a letter from the VFW outlining the restoration project, why the LAV did not meet the criteria for a prohibited vehicle. I concluded the letter not with a threat, but with a simple, firm statement. I consider this matter closed. Any attempt to enter my property or tow the vehicle in question before the proper, contractually agreed upon procedures are followed will be considered trespassing and theft. All such actions will be met with appropriate legal recourse. I printed 3 copies. 1 for my files. 1 to be hand-delivered to the HOA's official mailing address, a P.O. box at the local strip mall, and 1 I would deliver personally to Karen's doorstep. I walked across the street, the evening air crisp and cool. Her house was predictably immaculate. The lawn was edged with surgical precision, and a seasonal wreath of tasteful gourds hung on the door. I rang the bell. Through the frosted glass, I saw her silhouette approach. She opened the door, a look of surprise shifting to a scowl when she saw me. "What do you want?" she snapped. I didn't say a word. I simply handed her the letter. She snatched it from my hand. "This means nothing," she sneered without even reading it. I'll see you and your junk gone tomorrow. Read the letter, Karen, I said, my voice low and even. Read it carefully. I follow the rules. All of them. You should try it sometime. I turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. The ball was in her court. I had followed the procedure. I had documented my position. I had established a clear paper trail. Now I would wait and see if her arrogance would override her survival instincts. I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. She wasn't the type to ever admit she was wrong. This wasn't over. It was just the end of the beginning. The morning air was still and heavy with dew. A sliver of orange sun bled over the horizon, painting the underside of the clouds. I was up before dawn, a habit forged in the crucible of countless early morning formations. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, my eyes fixed on the driveway through the bay window. My letter had been a direct challenge to her authority, a procedural checkmate. A reasonable person would have paused, consulted the rest of the board, perhaps even spoken to the HOA's legal counsel. Karen, however, was not a reasonable person. My gut told me she would double down. At 6:15 a.m., my gut was proven right. A hulking black tow truck, its amber lights flashing silently in the pre-dawn gloom, rumbled down the street. It moved with a predatory slowness, the diesel engine a low growl that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't one of the big, reputable local companies. This was a smaller rig, Karen's cars and towing crudely stenciled on the door, a detail that was almost comically villainous. The truck pulled past my house and then backed into my driveway, its hydraulic arms and chains rattling like a medieval siege engine. I didn't run outside to scream. I didn't try to block them. I simply picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and hit record. From my window, I had a perfect, unobstructed view. The passenger door opened and out stepped Karen, wrapped in a pink velour tracksuit, a large travel mug of coffee in her hand. She looked like a Roman empress surveying the spoils of a conquered province. She gestured grandly toward the tarp-covered LEV, directing the tow truck driver, a greasy man with a ponytail and a stained t-shirt, where to position his vehicle. This was it, the moment of trespass, the irrefutable proof. The driver hopped out and began unspooling heavy chains, the thick metal links clanking against the concrete. He approached the LEV and, with a grunt, ripped the heavy-duty tarp off, exposing the vehicle in all its olive-drab glory. Even without its engine, it was an imposing sight, a monument of steel and military engineering, a piece of history she saw as trash. That was when my neighbor's security camera, a high-definition model I had helped him install last month, became my star witness. From its vantage point on his garage, it captured a wider angle. Karen pointing, the driver nodding, and then the crucial moment. The driver hesitated, looking from the multi-ton vehicle to his truck, then back to Karen with a questioning look. She waved a dismissive hand, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to him. He took it, glanced inside, and a wide grin split his face. He nodded vigorously and went back to work with renewed enthusiasm. A bribe, kickback, caught in crystal clear 4K. I zoomed in with my own phone, capturing the exchange as best I could. The chains were hooked to the LEV's tow pintles. The winch on the truck whined, the steel cable tightening with a groan. The LEV, all 12 tons of dead weight, resisted for a moment, its massive tires scarring the surface of my new paver driveway. Then, with a shuddering lurch, it began to move. I watched them drag my project, our tribute, out of my driveway and onto the street. The process was brutish and loud, a symphony of screeching metal and protesting rubber. Lights started flicking on in the houses around me. Faces appeared in windows drawn by the commotion. They saw the HOA president, in her pink tracksuit, overseeing the seizure of a veteran's property at the crack of dawn. They saw the triumph on her face. As the tow truck finally lumbered away, the LEV swaying precariously behind it, Karen took one last, long, gloating look at my house. She raised her coffee mug in a mock toast, a smug smile plastered across her face. I didn't move from the window. I just kept recording until her sedan pulled away. Then I stopped the video, saved it, and backed it up to the cloud. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of clarity. She had overplayed her hand so dramatically, so publicly, that she had given me everything I needed. She thought she had won. She thought she had removed the junk, but what she had actually done was sign her own confession. She had provided me with indisputable video evidence of trespassing, illegal towing, and likely conspiracy and bribery. She had declared war, and in her first major offensive, she had walked directly into a perfectly laid ambush. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. It was time to make some calls. The reconnaissance phase was over. The counteroffensive was about to begin. The first call was to my daughter, Sarah. She was a marketing director for a tech firm, a digital native who could craft a narrative and rally an online army faster than I could field strip a rifle. I sent her the videos, mine from the window, and the link to my neighbor's cloud storage. Her response was a string of furious emojis, followed by a simple text. On it, "They're going to regret this." I knew she'd handle the community information campaign, creating a private group for Oakmont residents where the evidence could be shared without tipping our hand publicly just yet. The second call was to the man I trusted most in the world, Master Sergeant Frank "Gunny" Davis, retired. We had served together for 15 years, from the sands of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. Gunny was a force of nature, a living, breathing network of Marine Corps connections. If you needed something, anything, Gunny knew a guy. "Jack, my man." His familiar gravelly voice boomed through the phone. "Don't tell me civilian life has finally bored you into calling your old Master Sergeant." I gave him the short version. The house, the HOA, the LAV project, and the illegal pre-dawn towing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, the jovial tone was gone, replaced by steel. "She towed the Whispering Death?" he asked, using the old nickname for the LAV 25. "Our LAV? The one we're fixing up for the boys at Post 302. The very same, Gunny. And this woman, this Karen, she did it on her own authority?" "She left a letter," I said, "and I have video of the whole thing, including her paying off the driver." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Jack, you sit tight. I need to make some calls. This ain't just some local yokel towing a pickup truck. This is an institutional matter now." My third and final call was to Marcus Thorne. He'd been a young lance corporal in our unit, a quiet, bookish kid who was deceptively tough. After his enlistment, he'd used the I built to put himself through law school, graduating top of his class. He was now a captain in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, a Marine lawyer. He owed me a favor after I'd, let's say, creatively reinterpreted a certain regulation to keep him out of hot water over a minor youthful indiscretion involving a stolen goat and a general's prize-winning petunias. "Gunny Miller," he said, his voice now carrying the crisp confidence of an officer and a lawyer. "To what do I owe the honor?" I explained the situation, emailing him the documents and video files as I spoke. He was silent for a long time, the only sound being the faint clicking of his keyboard. "Gunny," he finally said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She did what? Oh, this is beautiful. This is a gift." "How so, Captain?" I asked. "Because she's not just dealing with a homeowner. She's dealing with a legal gray area the size of a tank. That LAV, while technically decommissioned, is still on the books as heritage property on loan from the National Museum of the Marine Corps. This title is held by our alumni nonprofit, but the Corps retains a vested interest. It's not a civilian vehicle in the way a Ford F-150 is. By towing it from private property without a court order and against documented protest, she and that tow company have illegally seized an asset with federal ties," he continued, his words a balm to my furious soul. "This isn't just a simple tort. This is potentially conversion, conspiracy, and depending on how we frame it, interference with quasi-governmental property. We're not going to sue her in small claims court for the tow fee, Gunny. We are going to drop a legal bomb on her that'll make her head spin by noon." My dining room table looked like a command center. I had printed out the HOA bylaws, Karen's letter, my response, screenshots from the videos, and the corporate filings for Karen's Carson towing, which, to my utter lack of surprise, was registered to her brother-in-law. Sarah had already set up the private Facebook group, Oakmont Residents for a Fair HOA, and dozens of my neighbors had already joined, sharing their own horror stories of Karen's reign of terror. Gunny Davis called back with news. He'd spoken to a colonel at the regional command, who was very, very interested in the situation. He'd also rounded up a couple of volunteers. 2 of our old recon guys, both now built like refrigerators and working in private security, were eager to assist in the recovery of Marine Corps property. The plan was coming together. It was a classic pincer movement. Sarah and the neighbors would apply social and community pressure, exposing Karen's history of abuse. Marcus would lead the legal assault, leveraging the unique status of the LAV to bring overwhelming force. And Gunny's volunteers? They would be the cavalry. Karen had tried to fight a war of attrition with fines and paperwork. She was about to find herself in a war of shock and awe. While Marcus was sharpening his legal knives, I knew we needed more than just a single powerful case against Karen. To truly dismantle her regime, we needed to show a pattern of behavior. The illegal towing of my LAV wasn't an isolated incident. It was the brazen culmination of years of unchecked power. My daughter Sarah's Facebook group became the digital town square for this burgeoning rebellion. Her initial post was simple and devastating. It included the video of the pre-dawn tow, a brief, factual summary of the situation, and an open question. Has anyone else had a negative experience with our HOA president or her preferred towing company? The floodgates opened. Within hours, the group had over 100 members, nearly half the households in the development. The stories poured in, each one a small cut, a death by 1,000 violations. There was Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old widow, who received a $500 fine because her grandson's birthday party balloons were tied to her mailbox for 6 hours, violating the rule against non-standard mailbox adornments. Mr. Chun, a software engineer who worked from home, was fined for having a commercial vehicle in his driveway, his company-leased Toyota Camry, because it had a small, discreet logo on the door. Then there were the towing stories. So many towing stories. A young couple had their visiting parents' car towed from a designated guest spot on Thanksgiving because Karen claimed their guest pass, which she had failed to issue them, wasn't displayed. Another family had their son's car towed from their own driveway the day he left for college because its registration had expired 48 hours prior. And every single tow, without exception, was performed by Karen's Cars and Towing. The connection was undeniable. I reached out to a few of the most aggrieved residents, starting with Dave, the retired lawyer who lived 2 doors down. He'd been in a quiet, simmering war with Karen for years over the placement of his satellite dish. He invited me over, and his dining room table was even more cluttered than mine. He had years of correspondence, documented complaints, and a spreadsheet tracking every fine and fee he'd seen levied in the neighborhood. "She's running this place like a protection racket," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The HOA's legal counsel is a small firm that gets a retainer, but they rarely get involved because Karen handles enforcement herself. She uses the threat of legal fees, which the homeowner is responsible for if they lose, to bully people into paying her ridiculous fines. And the towing company is her hammer. Together, we started building a proper case file. We collected sworn affidavits from a dozen residents. We got copies of their violation notices, their canceled checks for unjust fines, their exorbitant towing bills. Dave pulled the public records on the tow company and found that not only was it owned by her brother-in-law, but Karen herself was listed as a silent partner on an early business filing from 5 years ago, a detail she had clearly hoped was buried. The financial incentive was now clear as day. She wasn't just a power-mad president. She was profiting from her position, using HOA authority to enrich her family's business. While Dave and I handled the paperwork, Sarah's group organized a neighborhood meeting. We held it in my backyard, around the fresh scars on the driveway where the LAV had been dragged away. Over 50 people showed up, a mix of anger and apprehension on their faces. For the first time, they realized they weren't alone. One by one, people stood up and shared their stories. The quiet fear that had kept them compliant was replaced by a growing, collective anger. The elderly Mrs. Gable, her voice trembling but resolute, held up her fine notice for the birthday balloons. The young father whose son's car was towed spoke about the logistical nightmare and the $800 fee to get it back. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, a sense of community resolve solidified. We weren't just a collection of houses anymore. We were a united front. We had evidence. We had witnesses. We had a clear pattern of abuse, malfeasance, and corruption. The investigation had borne more fruit than I could have imagined. This was no longer just about my LAV. It was about reclaiming our community from a petty tyrant who had weaponized the rules to feed her ego and her wallet. By the time the meeting ended, we had a signed petition with enough signatures to force a special election to recall the entire HOA board. The groundwork was laid. The evidence was compiled. The community was mobilized. Now it was time for Marcus to drop the bomb. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for Karen to walk into it. The document Marcus Thorne drafted was less a letter and more a surgical strike rendered on paper. It was 4 pages of dense, single-spaced legalese, printed on the official letterhead of the U.S. Marine Corps Judge Advocate Division. It was addressed not just to Ms. Karen Albright, President, but to every single member of the Oakmont Estates HOA board by name, as well as to Mr. Donnie Perkins, proprietor. Karen's cars and towing Marcus had insisted on serving them all individually. "We need to break their cohesion," he'd explained over the phone. "The board members who've been letting Karen run wild need to understand that their own personal assets are now on the line. We're not just suing the HOA. We're naming them as co-conspirators in an illegal seizure." The letter began by formally identifying the seized asset: light armored vehicle, LAV 25, USMC asset #7743A, currently designated as Heritage Property on Loan to the 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Alumni Association, a registered 501(c)(3) organization. This immediately elevated the vehicle from a simple truck to something with official, almost governmental status. It then laid out the facts of the case with cold, brutal precision. The date and time of the seizure, the lack of proper notification as stipulated by their own covenants, and the clear violation of my rights as a property owner. It cited the video evidence of the tow, explicitly mentioning the financial transaction between Karen and the driver, which it termed prima facie evidence of conspiracy and potential bribery. Then came the hammer. Marcus cited not just state and local property laws, but he wove in federal statutes. He referenced Title 18 of the U.S. Code, regarding theft and conversion of property with federal interest. He mentioned the potential for a federal investigation due to the asset's connection to a U.S. military branch. He didn't explicitly threaten a federal lawsuit, but the implication hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. The demands were simple, direct, and non-negotiable. 1. The immediate, unconditional return of USMC asset #7743A to my property within 24 hours of receipt of the letter. 2. A complete waiver of all purported fines, fees, and charges associated with the illegal tow and impoundment. 3. A formal written apology from the HOA board to myself and the 3rd LAR Alumni Association. 4. A certified check for $5,000 made out to the Alumni Association to cover damages, inspection fees for potential harm caused during the illegal tow, and punitive reparations. The letter concluded with a chilling sentence. Should you fail to comply with all of the above terms within the stipulated 24-hour timeframe, we are fully prepared to initiate legal proceedings in the appropriate state and federal courts. Be advised that such proceedings will seek not only the recovery of the asset but also significant compensatory and punitive damages from the HOA as a corporate entity and from each board member and co-conspirator in their individual capacity. Govern yourselves accordingly. We hired a professional process server to deliver the letters. I would have paid good money to see Karen's face when she was served. The server reported back that she snatched the envelope, read the first paragraph, turned a shade of mottled red, and slammed the door in his face. The other board members, he noted, looked significantly more concerned. One of them, a mild-mannered accountant named George, reportedly went pale and had to sit down. The clock started ticking at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood's private Facebook group was buzzing with anticipation. Sarah had posted a heavily redacted version of the letter's first page, just enough to show the official USMC letterhead and the list of recipients. The message was clear. The game had changed. That evening, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was George, the accountant from the HOA board. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice shaky. I just wanted to let you know, I had no idea Karen was going to do this. She told us she was handling a routine violation. We never voted to have your vehicle towed. Did you vote to stop it, George? I asked quietly. Well, no. It all happened so fast. She just does things. She put your name on this, George. I said, my voice flat. Your personal assets. Your house. Your savings. All because you didn't want to stand up to a bully. You have until 3 p.m. tomorrow to convince her to do the right thing. I suggest you get started. The line went silent for a moment. I could hear him breathing heavily. Okay, he finally whispered. Okay, the legal trap had been sprung. The poison pill had been delivered. Now we would see if the board would sever the infected limb to save the body, or if they would let Karen's hubris drag them all down into the abyss she had dug for herself. The 24-hour deadline was set to expire at 3 p.m. Wednesday. I spent the morning in a state of controlled anticipation, cleaning my garage, organizing my tools, preparing the space for the LAV's return. I refused to consider the possibility that they wouldn't comply. Marcus had built an ironclad legal cage, and they were rattling the bars. At 2:30 p.m., with no word from the HOA or the tow company, our recovery team assembled at the end of my street, just out of sight of the main entrance to the impound lot. The team was a sight to behold. Gunny Davis had arranged for a massive flatbed tow truck, the kind used for hauling semi-tractors, driven by a Marine reservist named Tiny, who was anything but. Following him were the two recon Marines Gunny had volunteered, Mike and Chavez. They were both over 6'4", with necks as thick as tree trunks, dressed in matching black polo shirts and khaki pants. They didn't look overtly threatening, but they radiated an aura of quiet, disciplined capability that was more intimidating than any overt display of force. The final vehicle was a nondescript sedan, but inside was our ace in the hole. Captain Marcus Thorne, USMC, sat in the passenger seat, wearing his Immaculate Service Alpha uniform. The crisp green tunic, the polished brass, the rows of ribbons on his chest. It was a uniform designed to command respect and project authority. At 2:55 p.m., my phone rang. It was George, the treasurer. She won't budge, he said, his voice frantic. Karen, she had a lawyer look at your letter. Some guy who does real estate closings. He told her it's a bluff. She's calling the police right now, telling them you're coming to her tow yard to make trouble. Thank you for the update, George, I said calmly. Did you and the other board members vote on how to proceed? We tried. She declared the meeting out of order. She says as president, she has executive authority. We're drafting a letter to have her removed, but that takes time. Time is up, I said, and hung up. I radioed the team. It's a no-go. She's called the local police. We proceed as planned. I'll meet you there. I drove my own truck, arriving at the entrance to Karen's Carson Towing, just as the flatbed was pulling in. The lot was a desolate place, a graveyard of crushed dreams and bad decisions, surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. My LAV was sitting in the back corner, looking forlorn. The owner, Donnie Perkins, Karen's brother-in-law, came storming out of his greasy little office, a tire iron in his hand. He was a smaller, weedier version of Karen, with the same sneer of unearned confidence. You can't bring that thing in here, he shouted at Tiny, pointing the tire iron at the flatbed. This is private property. I'm calling the cops. They're already on their way, I said, stepping out of my truck. Mike and Chavez exited their vehicle and took up positions on either side of me, their arms crossed. Their sheer presence made Donnie take a half step back. At that moment, two local police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. A sergeant and a younger officer got out. We got a call about a disturbance? The sergeant said, his hand resting near his sidearm as he surveyed the scene. No disturbance, Sergeant, I said, walking toward him. I'm Jack Miller. I'm here to recover my stolen property. This man is trespassing, Donnie screeched. And that truck was towed legally by the HOA. Just then, Marcus Thorne stepped out of the sedan. The effect was instantaneous. The officers' postures changed, their hands moving away from their weapons. They saw the uniform, the rank, the bearing. They saw a fellow professional. "Sergeant," Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative. He offered a crisp salute, which the sergeant, a veteran himself, reflexively returned. "Captain Marcus Thorne, United States Marine Corps, Judge Advocate Division. I'm here as legal counsel for Mr. Miller and the 3rd LAR Alumni Association. We are here to facilitate the peaceful recovery of a Marine Corps heritage asset that was illegally seized yesterday morning." He handed the sergeant a folder. "This contains a copy of our demand letter, the relevant HOA bylaws, and the title and registration for the vehicle in question. As you'll see, the tow was procedurally improper and, we contend, criminal. We are simply retrieving our property." The sergeant read the first page, his eyebrows climbing his forehead. He looked over at Donnie, who was now looking far less confident, the tire iron hanging limply by his side. He then looked at the LAV, then back at the Marine captain in full dress uniform. "Sir," the sergeant said to Marcus, "this is a civil matter. We're just here to keep the peace." "Exactly," Marcus replied with a thin smile. "And we are confident this can be resolved peacefully. Mr. Perkins is going to open his gate and allow our driver to retrieve our asset. And he's going to do it free of charge." "The hell I am," Donnie blustered. "That's a 12-ton vehicle. There's a $500 impound fee, plus $1,000 a day for storage. You owe me $1,500. Marcus just looked at him, his smile never wavering. "Mr. Perkins, my letter explained the consequences of non-compliance. You can either open that gate or my next call is to the nearest federal prosecutor and the IRS to discuss the business practices of a company that seems to specialize in predatory towing. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to look at your books." The standoff was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of the police radio. The sergeant looked at Donnie and gave a slight shrug, as if to say, "Your call, pal, the choice was clear. Give up the vehicle or risk his entire crooked enterprise collapsing around him." Just as Donnie's resolve was visibly crumbling, a cloud of dust and fury announced a new arrival. Karen's beige sedan squealed into the lot, parking haphazardly and blocking the entrance. She burst out of the driver's side, her face a mask of incandescent rage, a fresh notice of fine in her hand, presumably for me. She was clearly expecting to find me begging at the gates, ready to write a check. The scene that greeted her, the massive flatbed, the 2 imposing former Marines, the local police, and a JAG officer in full dress uniform calmly dictating terms to her whimpering brother-in-law, was not on her agenda. "What is going on here?" she bellowed, marching toward the group. "Donnie, don't you dare let them take that thing. They owe you money. I am the president of the HOA, and I demand." Captain Thorne turned to face her, his posture ramrod straight, his expression utterly impassive. He let her sputter to a halt before speaking. "Ma'am," he said, and the single word carried more authority than her entire tirade. "You must be Ms. Albright. I'm Captain Thorne. You are interfering with the lawful recovery of a United States Marine Corps heritage asset. I suggest you step aside." Karen stared at his uniform, her brain momentarily short-circuiting. The sight of actual, undeniable authority seemed to confuse her, but her hubris quickly won out. "A what? That is a piece of junk violating our covenants. Your uniform doesn't mean anything here. This is Oakmont Estates jurisdiction. I am the law here," she shrieked, stabbing a finger toward her own chest. At that moment, a car pulled up behind hers. Then another, and another. It was the neighbors. Alerted by Sarah on the Facebook group that the recovery operation was underway, a dozen of them had come to watch. They stood on the public sidewalk just outside the fence, phones held high, recording everything. The audience seemed to enrage Karen even further. "You have no authority," she yelled at Marcus. "I have a binder full of rules, and you are all in violation." "Officer," she said, turning to the sergeant. "Arrest this man. He's trespassing and trying to steal evidence." The police sergeant sighed, the sound of a man who was deeply regretting getting out of bed that morning. "Ma'am, this is a civil dispute, and this officer of the U.S. Marine Corps is not breaking any laws. Now, I suggest you lower your voice." Marcus took a step toward her, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Ms. Albright, let me be perfectly clear so there are no misunderstandings. Your HOA bylaws do not supersede state and federal law. You used your position to illegally seize this vehicle, in violation of your own procedures, for the financial benefit of your family member's company. That is called racketeering. You are currently obstructing the recovery of that asset. That is a crime. Every word you are saying is being recorded by multiple witnesses." He gestured to the gallery of neighbors. "You have no jurisdiction here. You have no authority. You are a private citizen who is about to be the subject of a very expensive, very public, and very damaging lawsuit. Your binder of rules is not a shield." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your power, Ms. Albright, ends right here." Today, Karen's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Rage, disbelief, confusion, and finally, a flicker of dawning, horrified realization. She looked from Marcus's steely eyes to the impassive police sergeant, to her brother-in-law who now looked like he was about to be sick, and finally to the crowd of her neighbors, all watching, all recording her humiliation. Her entire world, the tiny kingdom she had built on a foundation of petty rules and intimidation, was dissolving before her very eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Albright was speechless. "Donnie," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "Open the gate." Defeated, he fumbled with a set of keys, his hands shaking, and unlocked the main gate, swinging it open. "Tiny," I called out, "go get our truck." The big flatbed rumbled to life, its engine a roar of victory as it rolled past the stunned Karen and into the impound lot, its final destination the corner where my LAV was waiting. The great beast was coming home. The recovery of the LAV was a thing of beauty, a perfectly executed operation. Tiny maneuvered the massive flatbed with the grace of a ballerina, backing it right up to the front of the armored vehicle. Mike and Chavez, moving with the quiet efficiency of a pit crew, directed him and then swarmed the LAV, checking it for any damage from the tow. They attached the winch cable and soon, the 12-ton machine was being gently pulled up onto the flatbed, its wheels rolling smoothly up the ramp. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. Throughout it all, Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the useless fine notice still clutched in her hand. Her audience of neighbors watched in near-silent satisfaction, their phones capturing every moment of her downfall. As Tiny secured the LAV to the flatbed with heavy chains, Marcus Thorne walked over to the police sergeant. "Thank you for your assistance in keeping the peace, Sergeant," he said, offering a handshake. "Not a problem, Captain," the officer replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "Glad we could see this resolved without incident. With the property secure, our mission was complete." The flatbed, with the LAV riding high like a trophy, pulled out of the lot, followed by the Recon Marines car and then my truck. As I drove past Karen, I rolled down my window. "You know, Karen," I said, my voice even, "I'm going to have to send the HOA a bill for the damage your tow truck did to my driveway pavers. I'll be sure to follow the proper procedure." Her face, already a blotchy mess of red and white, seemed to crumple. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. The convoy back to the neighborhood was a victory parade. People came out on their porches to wave and cheer as we rolled down the street. The sight of the LAV, back where it belonged, was a powerful symbol. It wasn't just a truck. It was a testament to the fact that a bully could be stood up to, that injustice could be fought and won. We unloaded it back into its spot at the end of my driveway, the same place it had been stolen from just 36 hours earlier. The scars on the pavers were still there, a reminder of the battle that had been fought. That evening, the Oakmont Residents for a Fair HOA Facebook group exploded. Sarah posted the full, unedited videos of the confrontation at the tow yard. The story of Karen's public meltdown, juxtaposed with Captain Thorne's calm, professional dismantling of her authority, became an instant local legend. The next morning, the consequences began to rain down on her. The formal petition to recall the entire HOA board was submitted, with signatures from over 70% of the homeowners. An emergency board meeting was called for that evening, one that Karen could not declare out of order. Faced with overwhelming evidence of her malfeasance and the threat of being named individually in my impending lawsuit, the other board members, led by a newly emboldened George, voted unanimously to strip her of the presidency and suspend her from the board pending the recall election. Her reign was officially over. A local news station, tipped off by Sarah, sent a reporter to the neighborhood. I gave a brief, factual interview, focusing not on my anger but on the importance of community and holding those in power accountable. Mrs. Gable also spoke, her trembling voice gaining strength as she told the story of the birthday balloons. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news, complete with cell phone footage of Karen's tirade. The towing company faced its own reckoning. Armed with the evidence from our investigation, several homeowners filed a class action complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Agency. The agency launched a full-scale investigation into their business practices, and their license was suspended pending the outcome. Donnie Perkins had to shut his gates for good. The house of Karen had well and truly fallen. The victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to the entire community that had been living under her thumb for years. We had taken back our neighborhood. In the weeks that followed, a sense of peace and camaraderie settled over Oakmont Estates. The oppressive cloud of constant surveillance and petty tyranny had lifted. Neighbors were talking to each other again, not just to complain about the HOA, but to plan block parties and help each other with yard work. The recall election was a formality. A new board was elected, comprised of reasonable people like Dave, the retired lawyer, and George, the accountant, who was determined to make amends for his previous inaction. Their first official act was to pass a resolution formally apologizing to me and the 3rd LAR Alumni Association. Their second was to pay the $5,000 settlement and the bill for my driveway repairs without a single complaint. They also began a complete overhaul of the bylaws, stripping out the ambiguous, weaponizable language and replacing it with clear, fair, and simple rules that focused on safety and property maintenance, not aesthetic totalitarianism. My LAV project became a neighborhood point of pride. With the threat of towing gone, I left the tarp off. The men from my old unit started coming by on weekends to help with the restoration. Gunny Davis would be there, barking orders that were mostly ignored. Mike and Chavez would handle the heavy lifting. Marcus would even show up sometimes, out of uniform, to offer questionable advice on wiring harnesses. We'd work all day, the sounds of wrenches and friendly insults filling the air. And then we'd sit in lawn chairs as the sun went down, drinking cold beer and telling old stories. The neighborhood kids, who Karen had claimed were endangered by the vehicle, would come by, their eyes wide with wonder. I'd lift them up onto the hull and tell them about the history of the vehicle, about the brave men who had served in it. It was no longer a violation. It was a living history lesson and a community landmark. One Saturday afternoon, the newly elected HOA president, Dave, stopped by. He wasn't there to deliver a notice, but to bring us a case of cold water. He watched for a while as we worked to install a refurbished communications antenna. "You know," he said, shaking his head with a smile, "we're thinking of passing a new amendment to the bylaws. We're going to call it the Miller Rule. It will explicitly protect project vehicles and historical restorations." "I'm honored, Dave," I said, wiping the grease from my hands. We stood there for a moment watching my friends, my brothers, working together. The LAV was gleaming under the afternoon sun, its new coat of paint shining. It was more than just a restoration project now. It was a symbol of our victory. It was a reminder that you can't bully a man who knows the rules better than you do. It was a monument to the fact that when good people stand together, no amount of petty tyranny can stand against them. My life in Oakmont Estates hadn't turned out to be the quiet, solitary retirement I had envisioned. It had become something much better. It had become a community. It had become home. And as I looked at the restored vehicle, I knew that the battle had been worth it. Justice had been served, not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfying click of a ratchet turning, of a community being put back together, stronger than it was before.